Good afternoon, good morning, everybody. It's lovely to have you join us here today for our webinar about a pretty dark topic, unfortunately, and something that has certainly hit the headlines in the past couple of weeks. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Nick. I'm the VP of Blockchain Intelligence for Crystal. I've been with Crystal for about 3 years now, and joining with me today is one of our senior researchers, Laura. Laura, do you want to take a couple of minutes and introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you very much, Nick. My name is Laura Ambrosio. I'm Mexican. I'm a security consultant with more than 10 years of experience working in security field work in Mexico, but also in the rest of Latin America. It's a pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. And Laura, I think you're very modest about like your kind of background experience, but you've obviously provided some advice to people on this matters before. You just tell us a little bit about your experience with kidnappings.
Yes, well, I have a long story, like working with other security consultant services, helping them to implement most of the kidnappings trainings from crisis management team inside different kind of organizations. So even when I have ever react as a handholder, which is the main figure who helped to the organizations to deal with the kidnappings events, I have been, like in the backstage helping to the organization, creating the whole structure that they could need in case they are suffering for this kind of cases.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, did you ever expect to have to do one of these presentations when you came to work for Crystal, or do you ever think it was going to be a scenario?
Not at all. Definitely, I never expected. But well, after I check all of the cases, to be honest, Nick, it never surprised me because, well, we discussed this kind of things before. It appears that the digital world is chasing the physical and the real world, and definitely as a security experts, we need to evolve, like in the same manner. Otherwise, like the criminals are going to take advantage of all of this new area of technology, and this is the best example about what is happening between crypto and kidnappings. What is
Brilliant. Well, we've got a very exciting webinar for people today. Again, a little bit of a dark one. Just before we get started, though, a few housekeeping rules for those of you following along. If you do have any questions, please use the quick Q&A button, and we'll try and get to them at various points. Also, if I keep looking off to my left, that's because that's where the questions and the poll results are. Also, if you can, don't forget to answer the poll questions when they come up. It really helps us understand your level of understanding and preparedness, and that definitely helps shape how we would write reports and the kind of content we'll produce. Just for the interest of saving some bandwidth for those of us with like weaker connections, please leave your camera off, and please do not use any AI note-taking or recording devices. We will be sharing a version of this presentation to our YouTube channel later on this week, so you can go back and browse it at your leisure. Similarly, we will have some follow-up materials that come to you as well. Final then, and it's more of a general warning, is that we are going to be discussing some things that you might consider sensitive regarding kidnapping and torture, which you may find distressing or upsetting. So please be aware of that during our discussions. We're not going to show any graphic imagery. We're not going to go into sort of like high levels of detail, but it is a very, very sensitive topic and does involve things that people might find shocking or disturbing. Particularly, it's quite close to home within this industry. So, without further ado, Laura, I'll give you the first crack then. Can you give us a bit of context then on why we find ourselves here now?
Yes, well, Nick, it's not a secret that in recent months we have seen a worrying trend of high-profile kidnappings tied to the cryptocurrency industry, particularly in countries like France, London, well, the United Kingdom, but also in the United States. We are going to go in depth in this kind of countries, other countries that has been appearing during the last months. But well, multiple incidents have occurred in rapid succession. Some of the victims were attacked at home, other ambushed in public spaces, right? However, what is tricky is not just the location. In this case, for example, Hero. It's more about how well informed attackers are about the victims and the crypto world. The evidence presented by the authorities show that, just give me a second, the evidence presented by the authorities showed that apparently the kidnappers really know very well about the victims, but not just that's all. Also the crypto world. So one of the main questions that comes to my mind when I'm starting, like thinking about this kind of cases, It's about what aspects of the cryptocurrency world might appeal to criminals. So I have some hypotheses that maybe we can discuss it later. But the first thing, definitely, is that there is an struck perception on enrichment in short time. It's not a secret that platforms like Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, it's easy to find users talking about how quickly and easy you can get rich using cryptocurrency, right? Other aspect is that we are talking about an unregulated asset space. It's not a secret that in many countries around the world, the cryptocurrency environment is completely new. And this might be just my perception, but sometimes I think that the crypto environment feels like it's operating in 2017. And well, and it could be right or not, but the level of vocabulary and the technicality aspects of the cryptocurrency definitely open a whole gap between criminals, law enforcement organizations, and the rest of the world. However, one of the things that it's real that is real is that this digital world is chasing in the physical world, as I mentioned before. And I think that is a perfect scenario. I mean, like, I can do as a criminal whatever I want. And better yet, I can make huge amounts of money. And it seems that we have in front of us a fertile land where the law enforcement right now doesn't understand very well what is happening in the other room. And finally, my third hypothesis is that there are tons of information accessible for anyone, and the rewards is very, very close to us. I have been thinking a lot about this because many crypto companies have built their reputation through a word of mouth. And well, while that's not necessarily bad, this approach hasn't evolved, at least in my point of view. We still see CEOs and wallet owners making public investment to attract more investors. Sometimes company names closely resemble real people names, creating pseudonymous connection that could possess a real threat. This could allow criminals to access personal data and gain quick, illicit rewards. Just to give a quick example to you, when we think about a bank or a global company, please think about a company, a global bank, whatever you prefer. It's highly probable that your thoughts goes to the brand, not to the name of the owner. And I think that in the crypto land, in the crypto environment, it's completely opposite. We'd first think about the name of the owner and then about the name of the brand. And well, all of these hypotheses that we are going to discuss it later, um, it's it's based on what security researchers and criminology spaces refer to as the crime triangle you have in this slide. According to them, a crime can occur wherever in digital world or even in physical one, when three elements are presented. The offender, in this case, for example, the criminals in the crypto environment trying to steal our money, the place, the crypto space and social media platforms often lacking strong parameter regulations. And finally, the victims, users like you and me that are completely exposed to this kind of risks. So these elements come together and create the opportunity to appear new type of crimes, and in this case, this new type of category as crypto kidnappings occurring worldwide.
Laura, I just want to pick up a couple of points there, and I think something that you remarked on is you said that when we started looking at these cases, you said that although they were following like established typologies and they had high levels of reconnaissance, and we'll discuss the different phases later on, you did mention that they seem quite amateurish, like they don't have the same level of professionalism as other kidnapping groups. Can you just shed some light on what that means exactly?
Yes, well, based on my experience, one of the main characteristics of the traditional kidnappers is that they are part of very structured, well-structured gangs. Each of the members of the gang have a particular, like role inside of the gang. You are going to ambush the victim. You are going to make a surveillance. You are going to make the negotiation, etc., etc. But that's when we were talking about the traditional kidnapping gangs. But one of the things that I observe, based on the whole research that we have done together, is that, first of all, the kidnappers are very young. And this is something that we definitely need to discuss together, Nick, because this is something that is not usual, not at least in the security environment. Secondly, the time of the kidnappings are very short now. And it used to be completely opposite because considering that we were talking about traditional gangs with a strong, a strong background as a professional criminals, they really resist, the nervous of the moment. And that allows them to make a better negotiation with the families or maybe with the organization that was in the middle. But here, speaking about crypto, it seems that the kidnappers are younger, but not just that. Their ransom are paid by the victims. We are going to speak a little bit more about with specific cases, but this is a completely unusual aspect. And finally, it's about the level of violence. And it complex me, it completely that element complex me shook me because um, considering the traditional kidnapping gangs, they consider the victim, or they used to consider the victim as a product. I know that it sounds like terrible, but this is the way that it functions like this. So it's like the market. When you go to the market, you have a fruit, and you really need to, you try to cut the fruit because it's going to be more expensive if it looks, like in a better way or in a proper way. And it's the same analogy. It's the same idea with the kidnappers. They are going to try to care, or they usually try to care to the victim because they really want the money go back to them. But one of the things that we have seen in this type of places is the level of violence against the victims are terrible. We are talking about torture,
Mm.
and this
And,
is something completely different. What do you think, Nick?
yeah, I mean, I think this is a really fascinating dynamic, and as you said, it's like I think there are the mixed things. One is like the age of the people who are conducting this, and they're not experienced kidnappers, and like I think where you make a very right point, which is to say that okay, well, this is a product, right? Like my job is to kidnap someone. I actually want to preserve that person. That means like the longer I hold on to you, the more likely I'm going to get money out of the target, like whoever they're trying to ransom you for. And again, it's a very interesting set of negotiations. But we're seeing here is like very short, very sharp, very violent, almost Hollywood style, I would say,
Mm-hmm.
like how it's portrayed in movies rather than how it really plays out. And I think that's quite an interesting dynamic. And I think we'll examine that more as we go through when we look at a couple of
Mm-hmm.
case studies. So let's just roll on a second. So I'll take this one, I guess. So we did put together some notable cryptocurrency kidnappings as a timeline, and the earliest sort of major case that people discussed was this chap, Ryan Piercy, who was kidnapped in Costa Rica and ransomed for $500,000. They paid the ransom and he was released, and you can see there's been a variety of other events since then. However, what we've seen is an uptick in events in recent months. So there's some big ones in there, certainly towards the tail end of last year, and then some at the start of this year. This is based on publicly available data. One of the problems we've had with kidnappings generally is they don't always go well reported.
Mm-hmm.
There is also a problem with the way that cryptocurrency kidnappings might be reported, because it could just be like an armed robbery rather than an actual kidnapping. And I think there's like it's not always clear in the statistics there. So if there's any academics who do kidnapping researchers, we apologize entirely. We haven't gone to that level of depth yet, but it does give you a flavor of how prevalent they are. What I think is particularly interesting is you can see the trends here that there has been a rise since 2021, but already in May we've hit 15 attacks, and that's quite significant, which might mean if it continues to rise, we're going to see a much larger amount. 20% of them involve the detention of the individual, as in like a traditional kidnapping. What's also interesting too is showing how the attacks have sort of manifested generally in the first half of the year. So you can see here the majority of them operate from like January to May. And we had 9 in January this year alone. And what we can't tell is if this is just greater visibility of reports, or this is a concentrated effort by gangs to sort of engage in this kind of robbery, or if it's just cryptocurrency has become more in the mainstream, and people are more inclined to be ransomed for cryptocurrency for that particular reason. Last one I've got then, we looked a bit also about where people were when they were kidnapped, or where the actual activities took place. Majority North America and Europe, with the US leading 40. We think this might just be a reporting bias. Some in the Middle East, again, lots of people with crypto wealth there, which is why these cases get picked up. And plenty also in Asia too. But again, we don't have tons of data on this, and I think kidnappings generally have a bit of a data problem. Like it's hard to tell you know, absolutely where everything is. So I think we sort of covered this in our intro, but one of the things that we wanted to try and answer was like, well, why cryptocurrency? And I think you covered it well, Laura, which was it often involves an association with large public displays of affluence. I think many people who've been around the industry for a while will know the When Lambo, and it's all about buying cryptocurrency for Lamborghinis. And when you're broke, everyone's going to go work in a fast food restaurant. And it's that kind of like play that's gone on for whatever else. Similar things like tropes saying have fun staying poor, which get broadcast over social media. Things like that really like highlight it as an affluent and sort of like wealthy space. And there's lots of stories from, you know, investors early on in like 2011, 2012 who are now millionaires and have made tons of money out of cryptocurrency. And they have very public displays of their like wealth. Just for sort of reference too, this is the chap, Mr. Percy, who was kidnapped in Costa Rica and was later released, which is a great thing. The final things I gotta say is like we know that cryptocurrency has been used as a payment method in ransoms before for kidnappings. Control Risks wrote a document about that in 2018, and I'm sure the trend remains the same. What we're looking at here specifically are effectively aggravated robberies. We're looking at people who are being shaken out for cryptocurrency but detained against their will in order to sort of surrender their stuff. But also, it can involve the kidnapping of a relative or a loved one or a figure to try and extort some additional money. Laura, do you have any sort of extra questions on like the affluence thing and like why this has kind of led us down this path?
Well, from my perspective, I think that, as I mentioned before, there's a lot of information outside that it's more available for people that could be attractive for criminals. But also, I think that I would like to dig more about the social media and the kind of information and where do young people are looking in social media, Nick? And why do I'm saying why do I'm telling this? Because even when you mentioned that, for example, Hollywood is a very good reference about how kidnappings could occur. Definitely could also happen with the same with social media and the impact that they are having with young people. I mean, like as you mentioned, like the Lambo effect has a real effect in the daily day of a lot of people who is outside. And maybe this is something that we really do not understand very well because we're a little bit old. Probably, but definitely, like social media is reshaping, like the way as we perceive the life. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. And I think like the showing off too, I think that's not help matters. Like people want to show off what they've done, accomplished, and I don't think they always think about the consequences.
I
Um,
have a question for you, Nick. What do you think that, well, before we continue with the next slide, um, why do you think that the last events has been covering by the media during the last month instead of based on the last chart you published? Well, considering that in the United States, apparently the amounts of the amounts of kidnappings have been, like apparently before. Why do you think that right now we are talking about in a heavy mood comparing with before?
I think I think it's like the social media exposure to the attacks as well. Like I think everyone might have seen the video of the gentleman's family being attacked by kidnappers and being chased off with a fire extinguisher, which was, like a very, very fortunate escape for them and a very harrowing looking thing. But I think when you have that piece of media and it's in broad daylight in a city that's generally considered,
Mhm.
under the rule of law, and again, that's a subjective statement, but I would generally say that it's a more stable place than most. It generates this kind of interest, right? And I think what's quite interesting too is that when people talked about kidnappings previously, they tend to center around the non-Western sphere. So we're looking at Latin America, we're looking at parts of the Middle East, so like Iraq or conflict areas where these things are more common or more perceived to be more common. So when it does happen in these areas, it's definitely a lot more. It gets a lot more attention, especially in that kind of broad daylight of kidnapping. I think too is, you know, the narrative, and I don't think it's a fair one, but I think the narrative around some elements of the cryptocurrency community and that kind of showing off and that that hubris that's sometimes shown probably means that these stories do carry much better from a media perspective. And I do think there's an element of media attention here. But based on the data we're seeing, I think it's not just a media issue. I think there is genuinely a rising trend here that we do need to look at in more depth. Okay, just for everybody on the call now, I am now going to have a spoiler alert. As luck might have it, in preparation for this webinar, I happened to be flying on a plane, and on the plane there was a film. And the film is called Cold Wallet. And in a most remarkable series of events, it involves a group of people who've been extorted by, they've been rug pulled basically by a cryptocurrency business, deciding to seek revenge by kidnapping the CEO of the company and forcing him to return their money in perhaps one of the most, weird sort of like things that I think I've come across. It was released in 2024, and I think it's now available for streaming. We're not only promoting them, but I found it particularly interesting that there is a film about just this kind of scenario appearing, where in fact, yeah, one of the characters is, Josh Brenner's character is sort of like held against his will. He's tied up, and then he's forced to surrender information about his cryptocurrency wallets in a kind of thing there. I shan't add any more spoilers about it, but they definitely exist if you want them. Fascinating. But I guess we'll get back to the meat of the presentation then. I think we've got a poll results, but I don't know if I can see them. Can you see the poll results at all? Yeah, I can.
Yes, we
So
can see it now.
just going to discuss these quickly. So looking at the poll results, I think overwhelmingly people have said that they are not prepared at all, but they've got an idea of what they should be doing. Few of them are somewhat prepared. They've got some plans, but they haven't tested them. And 30% are saying they're unprepared at all, but no one feels they're completely ready for this kind of scenario. And I think that's also a sector thing. But what's your take on that poll result, Laura?
Well, it surprised me, to be honest, because comparing with previous, like webinars similar as this one, I heard that we obtained like something like 3% of people said that they have something related with crypto, with crisis management plans, or in one way or in another, they are completely prepared to deal with this type of risks. That's why I'm surprised, because at least I can see that 30% of the people, it's completely, some 19% of the people who is attending to this webinar are in somewhat prepared, but they have untested plans. So, it could give you, pleasure, it could give you, like some good ideas about how much do we need to still, working on this kind of webinars and future plans.
And I think, like, too, one of the things as well is I think if we were to ask the question and say, how prepared are you for a cyber attack? Like, are you prepared for information security events like a data breach or a theft or something like that? I think we get much different results. But people
Definitely.
don't consider this as an attack methodology, but still they're managing like millions, potentially billions of dollars of assets in some cases. So it is interesting to say that that's the thing there. Okay, so let's walk through kidnapping step by step then. Let's talk a bit about like what we can do about this.
Yes, well, I'm really fascinated because when I talk about crime and all of these kind of things, I really like to go to the roots. And this is about how could we understand, like step by step, not just kidnapping, also step by step. How can we understand the different type of crimes that are appearing in different ways, digital world, but also a physical way. So as shown in this slide, is like crimes typically unfold in 5 stages. The first three, planning, victim selection, and approach, belong to the prevent even phase. If we apply what at least the theory tells us is that if we apply strong preventive measure at this stage, we can reduce the likelihood of becoming a victim by up to 90%. To be honest, this percentage could be, like a little bit differs between some specialists with the others, but in an overall perception, if you implement good preventive measures, the likelihood to be a victim reduces dramatically. However, if the crime progresses despite our efforts, reactive measures must be taken depending on the type of the crime. And why I say that? For example, if the actions you take during a face-to-face extortion where a criminal demands access to your crypto wallet, actually we have a similar case in London a couple days ago, will differ significantly from how you respond to a kidnapping. In the first case, the extortion, the crypto demand wallet, the priority is to cooperate with the criminal and preserve your life, right? No one wants to fight for maybe some amounts of crypto wallet, right? Money. In the second, your action should focus on survival, using whatever resources could be available to you. And when I said in the second, I'm talking about, like real or at least more harmer crimes that could affect you or maybe to your family. I want to stress that even when we only have, based on what the specialists tell us, a 10% extra, this 10% extra matters deeply. Even if it seems like a small proportion, we need to understand that this percentage will determine whether a person survives or whether an organization continue operating. In the security world, we related to this step as a series of actions that must be in charge of what we call a crisis management team. The name depends a lot about the, about the type of the company. In some companies, they call them a war room. In others, a crisis management committee. I mean, like, it depends between one another. But the main idea is that all of the organizations, it doesn't matter if this is a digital 100%, company. They also need to have very robust crisis management plans, because you can suffer not just for a digital threat, for a crypto threat, but also you can manage, or maybe no one wants to be in that position, but you can also suffer for a real kidnapping. Now that we have arrived at the main topic, well, kidnappings, which is the reasons we are here, all of us. So let's explore in deep what is the kidnapping now. As mentioned before, kidnappings follow the same basic structure as other crimes, progressing through a series of steps. However, unlike more opportunistic crimes such as scams, ransom attacks, money laundering, or even physical crimes like pickpocketing or car theft, the planning stage in a kidnapping is usually longer and more deliberated. These extend preparation steps often believe red flags or warning signs, which, if the target identifies them early, they can avoid the crime. However, once a kidnapping occurs, additional phases unfold that are unique to this type of crime. For example, abduction, proof of life. We are going to speak a little bit more about what is a proof of life, ransom payment coordination, etc., etc. These steps not only involve the victim, but also activate the crisis management committee, as I mentioned before. At this stage, this appears to be a dual responsibility. On one hand, the victim must be focused on survival as much as he or she can do it. But in the other hand, the crisis management committee will be responsible for mobilizing internal but also external resources to create the necessary conditions to the victim's safe return. As I mentioned to you, in other quite similar webinars that we have previously had, just 3% of the crypto organizations has a formal crisis response team. That, on my point of view, it leaves us in a significant gap in their security systems. The lack of this preparedness, and I cannot stress more in this idea, Nick, is that it's going to represent not just a financial loss, a reputational damage, and maybe the impossibility to continue with your business continuity plan, because it will put, in real lives in danger. So what do you think about it? What do you think about all of this information, Nick?
I mean, there's a lot to talk about, isn't there? I think you're right as well. Preventative action is like, it pays off in spades, and I think we'll talk about that in a couple of cases we'll look at in a second. I also agree too is that, and I think I have it on the last slide, so I'll spoil it a little early, which is it's better to have it and not need it, and need it not have it. And I think that's how I sort of look at this. Like, it's very well and good to say, okay, well, we've thought about this, but we've got nothing written down. If it happens, time is a critical factor in any particular incident. And this is obviously the most serious one, because it might be a life at risk. How you manage that is such a really important factor.
And it's about time, definitely, but also about practice, because most of the organizations has very formal crisis committees inside the companies, but they have ever make a task ever. So
Yeah.
just imagine, you have a formal crisis management plan in your deck, but when a real crisis appear, no one's know the next step between one another. And this is something that it's critical as well.
Yeah. I'm going to move on to a case study now. So there are two really good cases kicking around the US at the moment about this. I try to mention, and it's on the bottom of the slide, but all individuals are presumed innocent until proven guilty. These statements are taken from the affidavits, which have been unsealed. So the data I'm referring to here is data that has been discussed by law enforcement in an accusation against individuals, but they have not yet been convicted of the crime, just to be clear there. So the first one is USA versus Rero et al. Interesting timelines. On or around the 19th of August 2024, large amount of cryptocurrency is stolen, $243 million. And the ones believed responsible, and I think at least one of those names on this list, Mr. Malone Lamb, has been accused directly of this by the US government, including a chap called Mr. Vid Chital, who's a 19-year-old from Danbury, Connecticut, and also known as Wiz, and Malone Lamb of Miami and Los Angeles, and this other chap, Mr. Gentil Serrano. They all belong to this cybercriminal messaging board or network called the Com, where they go to talk about their conquest, do a bit of networking, and boast about how great they've been as criminals and how much money they've done. This information is obviously shared amongst the group. They're all celebrating, having a great time. There are loads of sort of salacious pictures in a thread from ZachXBT about this. But then fast forward to 24th of August, and a gang who is connected to the Com, involving Mr. Barrero and his accomplices, 6 of them, they fly from Florida to New York and then move on to a rented house nearby in Roxbury, Connecticut. They rent vehicles, they conduct surveillance of the target, knowing seemingly where Mr. Chital lived, although that's not been disclosed in that particular affidavit, the pieces are put together. They conduct reconnaissance of the house, and then they observe the vehicles and pattern of life for a day. They then move in a day later and conduct an attempt to kidnap the parents of Mr. Chital, which is a fairly dramatic sort of step. In the process of that, they are apprehended, and obviously things don't get taken place. But we think the catalyst was someone was bragging on a cybercrime forum that they just stolen a load of money, and therefore they were targeted by other criminals. There is somewhat of a history, though, with those other groups. We know a bit more about Mr. Lamb, and he also had some interactions with criminality, but not necessarily from a kidnapping perspective, but more from a burglary sort of situation. So in the affidavit, it says that they basically collected data from leaked databases. If you remember, there was a leak of ledger related information a while back, which basically in some cases had home addresses, phone numbers, and other things, which tied victims to an address. Now, there weren't any wallet addresses associated with them in that database, but it did tie an individual to a location. So this group went and harvested personal identifying information from the dark web or leak sites or directly from itself. In the information, they had email addresses, information about which cryptocurrency exchanges they were using, in some cases, maybe wallet addresses, which would indicate wealth, and then also other information which they can use for social engineering. What they were then able to do using this, and this sort of diagram shows it quite nicely, is they take this data on the databases, they extract it, they use that to then track the victims' locations. In some cases, they were using compromised iClouds to find the iPhone to see when someone was home or not. When they discovered their way from home, they would then go and get access to their premises and steal their money. In other cases, they would do some social engineering, like a phishing phone call, install a remote access tool, AnyDesk, or something like that. That would then gain remote control of the victim's device, get their keys and seed phrases, and transfer the money out. A fairly sophisticated gang and fairly active in what it's doing. And as you can see, even though there's less indication in this particular case of them involved in direct harm of individuals, obviously not everyone inside that group is doing it without the individual being at home, and certainly they were targeting them in that way. So I guess let's talk about something nice, which is how can we stop this then? And you can see the big green screen that I am now illuminated in. But
Yes,
Laura,
I
if you
can
want to walk
see.
us through this.
No, but definitely, well, based on the information that you gave us, apparently most of the information that the victims, uh, well, share maybe in social media or maybe in other web platforms, it helped to the criminals to create all of these tragic scenarios. But well, that's why it's important actually to speak about how can we, like deter that the criminals continue, like attacking us. So when I prepared this slide, I just decided to divide the content in two main rows. Do you can differentiate it by the type of measure that should be your responsibility or will be in hand of the organization when you are part of it. So let's talk about in a personal level. So the most effective way to reduce your chances of being a target is to become unpredictable. I mean, like sometimes we usually think that criminals are, like another entity. This is something very, very normal, and I know why. I can feel why because definitely they are committing, like very bad things against people, and no one's in our maybe in our life never think about that. But well, criminals, it's a pity to say that. Well, no, it's not a pity. Criminals are the same as you and me because they really like like patterns. They really like like the comfort zone. They prefer, that's the reason why they prefer victims with routines, because predictability lowers the risks of being captured and increase their chances of success. In contrast, if you are, like an unpredictable potential target, changing your habits regularly, making, like harder your next step, you are going to be a less attractive target for the criminals. However, I really understand it having, as I mentioned to you, during the last years, like working with different type of people. And this is a very common question from the people who tell me like, Laura, how can you ask me to change my routine if the door of my house always is going to remain in the same place? How can I change if I don't have the money to change my car every day? And I understand it. I really understand it. And if this is not possible, I have to do a very great hack. And this is called the 100-meter principle and the red light principle. What does these principles tell us? Well, these concepts combine situational awareness with timing. We must be on high alert, the red light, during the 100 meters before reaching any place we consider unsafe, such as, for example, our home, our children's school, the office, etc., etc. Why? Well, because criminals often take advantage of these final moments when our minds are already shifting focus, thinking about meetings, tasks, or simply entering in a familiar place. That's exactly when we are in the most vulnerable moment. We can be the most attractive goal for the criminals in that 100 meters. By staying alert and observe during this critical zone, we can spot warning signs. For example, a suspicious vehicle surrounding close to my house, or maybe an unfamiliar person. And definitely, taking that in consideration, we can reduce the likelihood of becoming a target. Also, it's super necessary to establish clear communication protocols with our family. And what does it mean? We need to define what kind of personal information can or we cannot share in social media. And this is super important because, for example, I can have, like very rigid, like metrics for my social media, but what happens if my family, what happens if my mother, my uncle, always sharing information about how successful is Nick in the crypto land. Just imagine how much information we are sharing with the rest of the people. I mean, like, it's super cool that we are talking about this kind of information, but if this information never shared with the rest of the people who is surrounding me, all of these preventive measures are going to be completely tackled. And the next one is set boundaries about sensitive and public information, quite similar as the previous measure. But finally, we need to establish and share a family crisis management protocol, which should include at least a list of trustworthy people that could be react in case we are in a crisis moment, and definitely an emergency contact. It's very often that if speaking about kidnappings, for example, when this kind of kidnappings happen against an executive, the family they don't have any idea about who is going to be the first contact inside of the organization, and they just decided to start, like making some negotiation in the moments, etc., etc. So this kind of information is critical, is key for the family. And what about the organizational level measures? Well, as I mentioned to you, this is a double, like responsibility. This is a personal responsibility, but also this is an organization level that we also need to consider. Inside the company, several strategic steps can enhance collective safety. For example, we need to decouple personal identities from corporate roles. And we talk about, like in the previous slide. However, we need to avoid linking employees' real names or personal lives to business-facing crypto accounts or public-facing platforms. We need to promote a security awareness inside our staff. We need to make sure that all of employees understand the risk and the roles in mitigating these kind of type of risks. And finally, we need to develop a robust crisis management response plan, not only to protect digital assets, because as we discussed it before, this is something that I can swear that at least 90% of the audience have this kind of responses plans, like ongoing. However, what happened with the real world? So all of the team in the event need to understand how can together they can tackle the crime that they are facing. Applying both personal and organizational strategies, we can significantly reduce the risk in a high exposure environment like right now with the crypto sector.
Do you know what, Laura? This is really fascinating, and I think one of the things I think we need to sort of like re-stress is the 100-meter principle is such a big one. If we take the attack in France against that the chap and his daughter, and you take even the case that we were discussing just a minute ago about the people who are pretend to be whose son may have been a criminal was targeted, they both occurred almost immediately outside their residences or place of work. Like it's very clear, like these are places where you are vulnerable, your guard is down. They're unlikely to get you in the middle somewhere. They're going to get somewhere you they know you're going to be. You can't avoid. I can change my route home like 2, 3, 4 different ways, but I always have to drive down the strange street to get to my house. So it's always a vulnerable area, and I think that's a really, really important point. I do want to talk about everyone's favorite professional social media platform, and our content team love to make me do stuff on this. But we talk about LinkedIn, and this is a place where it's very difficult. Now, many of us who've come from a cybersecurity background or things like that know that LinkedIn is an absolute gold mine for information if you're looking to try and understand how an organization works. Some examples, you might want to know what technology a company is using for its servers or its security. LinkedIn you might find answers about it because people sometimes say, either they are communicating with vendors or they are getting qualifications which indicate those things, which can be useful. And that's like a really, really powerful way of like doing some research, but also identifying key people within an organization who have either access or control over funds can be accomplished through this research. So I think in terms of your awareness, like it's very important that we are responsible for what we put on LinkedIn. We don't overdo our job titles. We try and keep a relatively calm profile, and we monitor for sort of suspicious changes. Another thing as well, I think that people should be aware of is LinkedIn is like this really helpful platform. It's a great way to sort of meet people. I'm sure many of you have followed us on LinkedIn or our company, and that's why you're here now. But it's also a bit of a double-edged sword. So really think about what you're putting on there. Things that also might be considered is like when you're going to be at conferences, when you're getting back from places, because that then puts you in a place and a location which could be useful if someone wanted to sort of detain you or do you some sort of damage or harm. So yeah, just a side note on LinkedIn. I'll just keep this hidden. The risk is real. It is happening. This is your slide, Laura. But I think just for the sake of the brevity, do you want to talk a bit about what happens next?
Yes. Well, at this point, we have the risk in front of us. Remember that we talked a couple slides before about the different steps of a crime. So at this point, we are in the middle of a real kidnapping scenario. So all of preventive measures have failed, and we are now facing a real risk. What can we do? Let's imagine this scenario, okay? I'm going to give you another scenario, a real scenario in the next slide. But well, at this point, let's talk about, let's imagine together this scenario. Someone approaches to you, tries to dominate you, and force you into the trunk of a van. How many options do you really have? And what should you expect? Well, if the abduction succeeds, it's highly likely that you will face the typical next steps of a kidnapping. Providing a proof of life. What is a proof of life? Well, in the middle of the negotiations, the family or the organization who is trying to help you to recover your family, they are going to ask for the kidnappers for a proof of life. A proof of life could be, for example, a sentence, could be, for example, a name, could be and specific information that only the victim could have in their own. And I'm going to speak a little bit more about the type of different kind of proof of lives that we can ask if we are suffering for this kind of situation. But well, just to give you an idea about what is a proof of life. But also you are going to face an enduring a negotiation process. Possibly, this is going to be involving a ransom payment and then your release. So the critical question becomes here. How can we react if those first few moments to reduce the chances of being abducted in the first place? So let's see what happened in the next slide with the case of the government of the United States versus Pasco teenagers. So this is a scenario, okay? 3 teenagers were accused of abducting on November 2024 of abducting of a man at gunpoint outside in his department in Las Vegas. They stole him more than 4 million in crypto and NFTs before abandoning him in the remote desert on Arizona. Well, how does it happen? Well, first of all, they create a scenario about the ambush. Okay, after a crypto event in Las Vegas, as I mentioned, the victim returned to his apartment and parked his car. The 3 suspects then approached him and forced him into the back seat of their vehicle. Secondly, the abduction. In this process, we are formally inside of a kidnapping. The victim was threatened, and this is quite particular because I only see these similar cases, but in virtual kidnappings. But apparently, now we are talking about like a mix because the victim was threatened that his father, that the teenagers had in another room in another room to his father, and they claim that they are going to kill the father if they didn't pay to them. So it was a mix between extortion, virtual kidnapping, but also kidnapping. That's why we talk that this type of crimes, like has been evolving during the last months. But well, the teenagers dropped the victim across the Nevada border to White Hills in Arizona, and more than 70 miles and an hour drive from Las Vegas. The victim that was in an abduction, moment, they paid for his own ransom. And he paid for more than 4 million in crypto and NFTs. It blew my mind that because we were talking about that they opened another door in kidnappings because in which moment we start speaking about that the own victim is responsible to pay, like his ransom. It's insane, right? Because we usually thought about these traditional kidnapping gangs where they decided to make the ambush against maybe the kids of the family or maybe the wife or maybe other people very close to the owner of the bank account. But in this case, it seems like crypto opened this opportunity for the criminals that you can pay for your own ransom. It's insane, right? And well,
I think
finally, the release. The victim walked 5 miles alone in the desert to reach a gas station, and then he called to his friend, and finally, the police arrived for him, and well, etc., etc. However, well, I cannot hide that it definitely, like blew my mind when I read the whole case. What do you think,
yeah.
Nick?
I think the age of the guys as well, like 16-year-olds, they were minors that were involved in this was quite staggering. I think also too is, like it's the victim paid the money, but he was tortured. He was. I think this is where it gets difficult because does this constitute a kidnapping? Because yes, he was detained and he was forced to do something, but it's not a kidnapping in the
Mhm.
traditional sense, which I think is quite an interesting one too. And I think you know usually, as you said, they go for someone on the periphery, perhaps because they're a softer target. Like the family's not got the protection, or maybe they don't have the training. so it's easy to go after them. But in this case, you can go for much softer targets. Yeah.
No, please go ahead.
Go ahead. We could talk about the poll, and I think there were some interesting remarks on the poll too. Unfortunately, it's disappeared from my screen. But I can see it again now. Okay, so a fair amount of concern that's expressed. So over half, like 70-80% of you are concerned that there is a chance, more than 60% chance of you being affected by a kidnapping or physical theft, which is quite remarkable actually. But I think it's very symptomatic of perhaps the current system, and I really hope the takeaway from you guys today is that there are things that you can do to sort of minimize your risk. Just to pick up on your comment, Tahir, I think this is a good point, which is, sorry, Tahir, I do agree with you that like people need to be visible as founders and they need to be in the public domain, but I think it's also they need to control their exuberance and maybe not be so immodest, which could make them more of a target. Business is good, business is doing well, but you don't necessarily need to be out there flashing your money every 5 minutes because that will make you a target. And you can think about managing your social media so where you are and what you're doing and where you live and your vehicles aren't necessarily publicly known or well known. Make these guys work for their information. If we go back to those guys and doing the reconnaissance, they used a lot of databases, but they didn't have to work particularly hard for that. Let's be difficult targets. I think that's my best point. Don't try and it's not the opposite of having marketing or media. Like you still need to do all those good things, and it's really important to get your project out there for that reason. But also at the same time, you need to think about what you're doing, and maybe think about, okay, how can I be careful and with what I'm sharing, and give these guys a hard time. Don't make it easy for them. Laura, I guess let's talk a bit about the last two phases then, and I'm conscious about time as well, so we'll have to move on.
Well, as I promised to you, I will give you some options about how can we manage in case we are suffering for this kind of cases. So during the abduction, my main recommendation, it's very simple. It's fight for your life. I mean, like, it sounds like very literally, but I can stress more in this idea because actually a couple of days ago we saw like this incidence of the payment case where the grandfather literally he fight for his daughter's life, and you can see in the video like how much he kicked, how much he screamed, etc., etc. And this is idea of this part of the recommendation. If you need to hit, if you need to kick, do it. This is the moment. Use whatever is in your hands to resist. Why? Well, because as I mentioned in early slides, kidnapping is not an opportunistic crime where cooperation increases your chances of success. In this specific moment, resistance may be your best option. However, if resisting doesn't work and you are forced into the vehicle, you need to be focused on preparing yourself on what is going to come next. Try to remain as calm as possible. I know that probably this is something that could sound like very, very weird in speaking about these kind of things, but definitely we need to remain as calm as possible because you are going to start in other kind of steps where you are going to need to provide to the criminals a lot of information. And remember, if you can control yourself, maybe you can give them as much as information that maybe you don't need to share with them, just because you don't want to be suffer for another kidnapping or maybe for another potential crimes because of the previous information you give when you were abducted. So remain calm. In many cases, once abduction is complete, criminals reduce the level of aggression. In some cases, this may be the moment to politely request essential needs, especially, for example, medical condition. And I know that this could sound like very weird, but this is something that happened, and in many cases, the criminals really accept this kind of requestments because, as I told you, they really want to remain you as safe as possible. Definitely, the brackets we need to put in that sentence. Okay. Also, if they offer basic necessities like food, water, or hygienic items, accept them. And well, cooperate with them, as I mentioned to you, without revealing sensitive information that could endanger you and your family. And your only goal in that moment is to stay alive, lower the risk of further harm or something similar. Trust your crisis management team. And this is something super important. We need to understand that outside of the zero zone, which is the place where you are located, there are tons of people that are trying to help you to go back to your house at least as in a better shape. So if you want, we can go to the next slide, Nicolas, because that's the moment when we are start speaking about the responsible of the crisis management team slash war room slash etc. Crisis management team, crisis management committee, etc., etc. What is happening in the other side of the zero zone? Well, while you are navigating in the immediate threat, your crisis management team should already be activated, working closely with external advisors such as wallet security expert, blockchain forensic specialists, handholders, for response negotiator, etc., etc. All of them create what we call a war room to manage the situation. The objective that they have is clear. They need to be ensured that the victim safe release. They need to prevent future incidents, and they need to be responsible to generate a long report that can support law enforcement in capturing the criminals. In cases involving crypto wallets, your forensic expert will play a critical role as other kind of experts in other kind of topics. But well, I can stress more that in these kind of cases, the crisis management plan will be responsible to see the risk in front of them and create the strategies requirement to finally like release the victim in a safest manner. So well, basically this is the role that the crisis management team work with the hand of the victim in the other side. And well, I know that no one wants to speak about this kind of situations, but they are going to be the crisis management plan. The crisis management team always going to be, like the key element in this kind of situations.
And I think, like, just to sort of pick up on your point there, it's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. Like, it's very, very simple there. I just think too, like, just to be clear as well, everyone's got a different threat model. If you are, the CFO of a major project and you have billions of dollars under management and access to keys that could potentially move lots of money, you probably need to think about this. If you're just a normal retail investor who might have a bit more and a low social media profile, you may not need to have this level of planning or thing. It is a scalable problem. But definitely if you're big enough and public enough, you need to have considered this and you need to be ready. Because when it happens and you don't have a plan, then you really are in a difficult position. So there we are on time, incredibly enough. If we could just close the last poll, please, if everyone's voted. I should get the numbers in a second. Laura, have you got any closing remarks? I know we're going to probably go a minute or two over time, but is there anything else you'd like to sort of say to anybody at the moment about what we've covered today? What's the one thing you think is the most important takeaway from today?
That definitely, I think that as the security environment should adapt to these new realities. As I mentioned, in many cases, this is a fertile line that if we are not there, a lot of things are going to happen and shady things are going to happen over there. So we need to evolve as the AI, we need to evolve as the technology, we need to evolve as the world is changing. And this is something that requires, and apparently we are very slow, we are being very, very slow in this type of scenarios. But well, what do you think, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, I think
What is your
from my
last
perspective,
idea?
I'll close it out there. I think from my perspective, the one thing I'd like everyone to understand here is that in crypto, we tend to learn our lessons through mistakes, right? We tend to see a problem and then we adapt and we get better. And if we remember, cybersecurity was like an early thing. Those of us remember Mt. Gox all those years ago, and then cybersecurity became, around, and then we ended up with some pretty robust people in cybersecurity who could help protect cryptocurrency exchanges. Smart contracts were vulnerable. We have now many firms do smart contract auditing. This is just a natural evolution of cryptocurrency understanding its market, which is okay, we've got lots of money under management. we need to think very carefully about all the aspects of security, and not just the digital ones. We can think about the physical ones too, and they are overlooked in this space. What I'm heartened by is that over 90% of you said that you are thinking about revising your protocols for physical security because of these attacks. I think that's a wise thing to do. I don't think you have to go full, tinfoil hat and start, only using the phone once. And as you said, changing cars every day and moving and sleeping in a different bed every single night and never using the same phone number or whatever else you want to do for your anti-surveillance awareness. Like we're not at all suggesting that, but it is worth revising your threat model now, and at the very least, thinking about formulating a crisis management team if you think there's a big enough threat to you. And I think with that, then I know we're a minute over. Thank you so much for your time, Laura. It's been absolutely fascinating. Until the next time, if anyone wants to contact us about this, they want help in establishing a crisis management team or want some advice or guidance, please reach out directly to us at the sales email address. And we'd love to sit down and chat with you about what your requirements are. We have a wealth of experience in the company about managing crises because we come from those kind of backgrounds too. This is something that sits very much within our skill set, and we're happy to provide advice. If you are experiencing an incident or there's something going on, I always think it's a worthwhile plan to sort of reach out for some expert advice. Know who you want to talk to early on. Have your investigators, have your crisis management consultants ready to go. So if you do have that issue, you can go straight to doing getting some help. Thank you very much, Laura. It's been fantastic.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you, everybody. Cheers.